What do your specific gravity readings say about your brew? Today on CSP Unpasteurized.
That's right, it's a new edition of Unpasteurized, where we babble, hopefully coherently, about a specific topic. Today's specific topic is specific gravity.
And what are you drinking, Derica?
I am drinking the best thing ever. This is our raspberry cupcake hydromel.
I don't know if that came out yet by the time this comes out. I don't think so.
I don't know, probably not. So spoilers.
I don't know. We have a trip coming up, so we're kind of shooting a whole bunch of videos, and I'm not sure what order they come out in yet. I'm drinking mango mead from 2 years ago. This is actually going to be, it'll be 2 years in February. And I don't remember it being amazing.
That's a nice color.
But right now, it's kind of pretty looking. It smells good. I'll let you know how it tastes in a minute. Because we want to talk about specific gravity. And the thing is, specific gravity, some people say, oh, I never use a hydrometer. I never take readings. Okay, that's fine. You can totally make homebrew without those things.
The reason why most often they say they don't do those things is because they don't care what their ABV is or their alcohol by volume of their beverage, which I agree with them. I don't particularly care what the ABV is of my beverages either.
Yeah, not in a true sense. Like, I care if it's low ABV or high ABV, pretty much. Like, mostly for preservation. Like, if it's 5 or 6%, I know that's probably not good to last for 3 to 4 years.
Right. Should I store it in the refrigerator or should I just put it on the shelf?
Right. Whereas if it's higher than that, you probably want to age it and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it matters, but that's about it. Yeah. Beyond that, like, is it 7.7 or 7.9? Doesn't make a difference. Is it 12 versus 13? Doesn't make a difference. Now, that's our opinion. That is also the opinion of a lot of people. And some people really get caught up in that. They want to make the highest ABV they possibly can and things like that. To us, it's a flavor thing too. Like this, for example, this is about 13% ABV. That's about 4. If this was made 18 to 20% ABV, it probably would taste quite different, take longer to age, take longer to taste good. Okay, so...
If this was a higher ABV, this wouldn't be my 4th glass of it.
Right, exactly. So my saying, as I always say, is if you want more alcohol, have 2 glasses. It's just, have more.
Or 4.
Or 4, yeah. It's only 4% though, so that's cool.
But that's not what we're talking about today.
I know. See, this is what happens when we get talking. So, in the beginning of a fermentation, when you're assembling it, putting it together...
In the beginning.
Your specific gravity is the determining factor for how much alcohol you can make, period. That's pretty much what it means. It's if you put in more fermentable sugars, whether it's honey, sugar, fruit, whatever, and you get a higher specific gravity, you can make more alcohol.
Potentially.
Now, that's potential alcohol. Actual alcohol tolerance comes from your yeast. So your sugars determine the potential, but the yeast are kind of like the gatekeeper saying, nope, none shall pass. You know, there's a certain level at which they're going to say no more.
But as we like to say frequently, yeast can't read.
Yeah, that gate might move.
In different conditions, they may react differently. They might nope out on you way earlier than what their potential alcohol tolerance is. Or they may go, you know what, I'm super happy and I'm just going to keep on going like the Energizer Bunny.
Right. Like under certain conditions, Gandalf might have been 10 to 20 feet forward when he planted his staff. Yeah. And under others, he might be 10 to 20 feet back, which could have changed the outcome of the entire trilogy of movies.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so that's what it does in the very beginning of fermentation, okay? Pretty simple prospect, but you need 2 pieces of information. You need your specific gravity and you need your yeast alcohol tolerance. If your potential alcohol far exceeds your yeast alcohol tolerance, a couple things can happen. One, it could just finish and be sweet, okay? Or you could potentially, because yeast can't read and they don't know they're only supposed to go to a certain percentage, it could go past it and it could still run dry. Or it could be so much sugars that the yeast just say, nope, and they actually could die and cause a stall where you're not going to get anything close to what your yeast tolerance is, and your brew's going to end up very sweet.
And I think that's a really important aspect of fermentation and the process that I hope you listened and paid attention to. If you did not, just go backwards a little bit and listen to Brian say that one more time.
I forgot what I said, so you're just going to have to rewind and watch
Too much sugar can cause your yeast to die.
Yeah.
And we've heard this time and time again where people are like, I want all the alcohol, so I put in 10 times as much honey as you did.
Yeah.
Well,
that
you just
doesn't work.
killed your fermentation.
Yeah, it
Congratulations.
doesn't work. Yeah, yeast will actually, like, their cell walls will burst from the osmosis from... There's a name for it that I can't think of right now, but too much sugar getting into their system will actually pop the cells and they die.
Yep.
In which case they don't ferment anymore, and you didn't make more alcohol, you just made really, really sweet, low ABV alcohol, which is, some people like it, but it's not really a great thing. But that's what happens at the beginning. So it's kind of like, if you don't take a reading at the beginning, if you know your measurements properly, you can do it. Because, like, let's just, for example, say you're using a 14 or 15% yeast, like Loudon 71B, right? 13 to 15% is pretty much its usual tolerance. If I know that sugar is 0.046 gravity, specific gravity, per pound in a gallon, I can put in, say, 2 pounds. And I'm at like 1.0194, something like that, 1090-ish gravity. That way I know, with a 1090 gravity, my potential alcohol is somewhere in the 12 to 13%. I'm below the tolerance of my yeast. It's probably going to run dry, which means I can back sweeten and then pasteurize or whatever and have a great product, no problem. However, if I put in 3 pounds, now I'm at like a 1.13 something gravity. That's well above 13 to 15% potential alcohol. Probably not a good idea. It could work, but it's not as likely. It's not as effective. It's not as efficient. And even if it does work, you're probably stressing your yeast. You're asking them to do more than they were intended to do. And when you do that to yeast, they produce things like sulfurous off smells and flavors and harsh, nasty stuff.
I don't like those things.
Yeah.
Do you like those things?
No, yeast don't like it either. So don't do it to your yeast. Keep it within the range of what the yeast can handle. Now, a little bit over might give you a sweeter brew at the end, but it's kind of a crapshoot. You never really know. We used to actually do it that way all the time, and we just took what we got at the end instead of fine-tuning it. Whereas now, we aim for just a little bit below the tolerance of that yeast, knowing we can always sweeten it later, and we can sweeten it to taste and get it exactly how we want it, rather than letting the yeast decide. It's good to let the yeast do their thing, but at the end, it's your brew. And the other side to that is, because we went below the tolerance of that yeast, we're giving the yeast a little leeway so they shouldn't stress. There shouldn't be those off flavors or weirdness, and it shouldn't take a really long time to age as a result. So
to sum up, the specific gravity reading at the beginning of your creation is to tell you potentially how much alcohol you can create, and to see if your sugar range is within the parameters of your yeast, so that you don't stress your yeast.
Yeah, you're checking this. It's a health thing for your brew. Think of it that way. Rather than just knowing about all alcohol, knowing the alcohol is important because you need to know what the yeast can handle. But it's not for, oh, I made 15 or I made 13. It's more for, I made an alcohol content that's okay for my yeast to deal with. That's actually the more important aspect to that. Really, really crucial there.
So now we're going to jump ahead to our first check.
Yep. Well, now we're on middle of fermentation.
Okay.
Let's go with that.
Sure.
Your first check usually happens pretty much when you start seeing levels dropping a lot. Like you don't see the bubble as fast. I'm not going to put a count on it because I don't count bubbles. I've never been into that. It doesn't mean anything other than gases are escaping. I've said this before, but if you have water, just plain water, in a fermenter with an airlock and change the temperature in the house,
it's going to bubble.
It's going to bubble. Or suck back, one of the two, depending, because it expands and contracts with temperature.
Yep.
So there are gases that are coming out of your brew, depending on how long it's been sitting, that it could just be off-gassing. It could be fermenting. A really good way to know if it's still fermenting is look at the side. If you see little tiny bubbles regularly coming up, like a lot, just it's probably still fermenting, okay? But you'll also see activity in the airlock with that. So you're probably not as likely to want to do your first check yet. Also,
sorry, there's cat activity.
Yeah. Do not go by a set time to take your first check. I see a lot of people do that. They'll find a recipe or they'll even watch one of our videos, and after 2 weeks, we're doing our first check. Well, that's ours in 73 to 75 degree Fahrenheit, Celsius right here, temperatures. where yours might be different.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a cooler temperature, it's going to take a lot longer, sometimes double as long as ours. So just because ours was ready in 2 weeks doesn't mean yours will be. If you still see a lot of activity, don't move ahead. Let it finish. Yeast do not know how to read. They also don't know how to read a calendar or a watch. So none of those matter to them at all. Anyway, what we just do is we look at it and we say, all right, yeah, that's really slowed down. It's almost no activity. All right, time to take a check. Another way to go is leave it for like 2 months. You're not going to hurt anything. Unless it's a beer or cider. Those I tend to do a little bit faster, but a full-on mead or wine,
Yeah.
leave it for a couple months.
Just like everything, there's no absolutes here. Everything is a variable depending
right.
on the circumstances.
We are not Sith.
We are not.
Okay, so you're getting to your first check. Activity looks kind of low. What you're looking for there is a number reasonably low for what you did. And there's a caveat to this. If you did what I call the correct way, the safe way, let's say the safe way, because correct means there's only one way. There's multiple ways to do this.
Yep.
The safe way, the way we tend to do it, is to make sure that your projected or potential alcohol is lower than what your yeast can handle. If you did that, you're probably looking for a number of 1.000 or below. Okay. Anything above that, I would be concerned that it's not done yet. It should be ultimately below 1.000. That is kind of the idea that it's slowing down, it's nearing finish, but you're not done. Let me explain. That's if you did it the safe way. If you overdid what the yeast can do, now you have some calculations to do. Like say you went 20 to 30 points over what the yeast can potentially do. Well, you might stop at 20 to 30 points above what would normally be considered finished. But then what if it's stalled too? It gets complicated, and that's why I don't recommend doing it that way. So you might end up at 1.020 rather than 1.000 and think it's stalled. It didn't stall. Your yeast are done. But are they? Are they really?
And that's why
we take a second reading.
That's right. We wait a week and take a second reading and compare those two readings.
Mm-hmm.
We want to compare, are they the same number? If they are the same number, that is a really important indicator that fermentation process has stopped. But beyond that, we need to confirm, has fermentation process actually stopped because it was supposed to, or has fermentation process stopped because of outside factors, aka a stall?
Right. And there's even a third to that. If you did it the safe way and your number was, say, 0.0990 the first time, and it ends up at 0.0990 the second time, you're done. It's safe. You can bottle that. It's stable. As long as you do not add anything to it or change it in some manner. If you add any more sweetener to it, you diluted it, there's a possibility of fermentation, and you added more fermentable sugars. If you add water to it, there's a possibility you can dilute that, and if there's any sugars left, you could possibly restart fermentation. Now, before anybody says, but it's 0.990, there's no sugars left, let me give you a little information here. Ethanol, pure ethanol, is 0.790 original gravity. Water is 1.000. Most people generally accept 1.000 as done or dry, but let me just give you some information. 0.790, 1 part, 9 parts of 1.000, or a 10% ABV, actually comes out to I need a calculator. Using the calculator teacher said I would never have, that comes out to 0.979 final gravity to be dry at only 10% ABV. If your ABV is higher than that, the number goes down because the percentage of ethanol goes up. So the idea that 1.000 is automatically done is false. It's just a generally accepted idea that a lot of people believe in that is actually not true. That number can fluctuate a lot, all the way down to that 0.979 number for 10%. Lots of math, lots of numbers, and I'm sorry. You don't need to know all this stuff. You just need to know, am I within the tolerance of my yeast at startup? And how close am I to where it should be when it's ending?
That's for
really,
safety reasons on both ends.
Exactly. So that's the middle. You take a first check to see where it's at. And if that number is above 1.000, and it shouldn't be because you did the safe way, then you probably want to give it some more time. And then do another check in a couple weeks. And then after that, do another check, as long as that number keeps going down. If the number is still going down, do not rack. Do not do anything other than let it keep going. Okay, unless you're doing a step feed, whole other story. Like I said, there's no such thing as absolutes here. We're not Sith, like I said.
But let's say you took your first specific gravity, your initial, your OG, if you will, and then you took your dual middle gravity and it says you're done. All the fermentation is complete. So what do you do next? Well, you're probably going to do some flavor adjustments.
But you're going to rack it first.
Yes, but I'm still talking within the realm of specific gravity.
Oh, okay.
That's what we're talking about. That's the topic today.
Right.
So you do all the stuff you need to do, including racking, and then you do flavor adjustments. And sometimes those flavor adjustments include sweetening. Now, this is just to get it to the sweetness flavor that you want. This has nothing to do with fermentation. You don't want to fermentate. You don't want fermentation to continue. You just want it to have a sweet brew when you're done.
Right.
So after you got your flavor tweaked just right, go ahead and take another gravity reading, another specific gravity reading, and that number has nothing to do with the previous numbers. That's just where your sweetness level is.
Yep.
So that's what that number stands for. It's not going to go into the equation of how much ABV you have or any of the other things. You don't even have to take that in consideration. You actually don't even have to take this reading unless you want to have on your bottle all the information saying what the final gravity reading is.
Well, you don't have to take it, but let me give you a little food for thought as to why I think it's an important reading. If you made a recipe, and at the end you said, I added 1 pound of honey for sweetening, but one time you make that, you end up with 3/4 of a gallon. The next time you end up with a full gallon. Another time you have 5/8 of a gallon.
For replication, sure.
If you add a pound to each of those, you're going to get 3 different sweetness levels.
Yep.
I would much rather have, and this is why we do it this way in our videos, I would much rather have what I sweeten it to as a specific gravity. That gives me a better gauge for actual sweetness, volume independent.
Sure.
That way you can make 1 gallon one time, 5 gallons the next time, and as long as you sweeten to the same level, you just made the same thing.
That's right. The other point that I want to add to that is, more than likely, if you add sweetener at the end, you're going to want to stabilize your brew in some fashion. So that way you can be absolutely sure that fermentation is not going to restart.
Right.
As Brian said earlier, any adjustments that you make after you have determined that fermentation is complete can actually negate that, and fermentation could restart. So our preferred method for stabilizing is pasteurization.
Yep.
We have a full video on that. I will link that in the description below.
Couple notes on pasteurization and when to do it. People have asked this a lot. Should I pasteurize then sweeten or sweeten then pasteurize? We tend to sweeten then pasteurize, and here's why. We had one time it bit us in the butt. We pasteurized, and then, because I thought, oh, well, we want to ultimately do the final taste adjustments after pasteurization, because it can sometimes mellow things a little bit, it can sometimes alter flavors a little. So we wanted to do the ultimate after. We added honey after pasteurizing, and it started fermenting again, because honey can have wild yeast in it that reactivated and started fermenting. It came out fine in the end,
Yeah.
but we had to be aware of that. If you're going to sweeten with honey, you probably want to pasteurize after. If you're going to sweeten with sugar, you can pasteurize before and then do your sweetening.
Basically, it just depends on what type of ingredients you're going to add to adjust your flavors. If you add fruit, for
Fruit can
example,
have wild yeast on it.
they're going to have wild yeast potentially.
Unless you pasteurize the fruit or the honey first, in which case now you're double pasteurizing. Might as well just do all your flavor adjustments and then pasteurize, then let it sit for a while.
Yep.
That's why we pretty much do it that way all the time now, just so that we don't have a chance of somehow wild yeast got in there and started fermenting again. Because, you know, that when you get it just right, you have it just the way you want it, and then it re-ferments again. You're like, ah, damn, now I gotta start over again.
Now, some of you may say, well, I don't particularly care if that happens. And that's fine as long as you're under airlock.
Yes.
Because if you bottle it
Yes.
and it starts fermenting in
That's
that bottle,
bad.
you're going to erupt.
Yes. It's not just
Kablooey.
erupt, they're going to explode. You've made bombs.
Blammo.
Yeah, it's not good. So that's kind of the best practices, what we found anyway. I'm sure there's a million ways to do this.
Sure.
And we're not saying that our way is the best way. We're saying that our way is tried and true. We've been doing it this way for years, and it's evolved over many years too. Not just the time of the channel. We had way bad practices before the channel and didn't even know it. And then we learned that they were bad, so we stopped doing those. And then, you know, this is how science works. You have an idea that this is the right way to do it, or this is what works best for me. And then you realize, oh wow, there's a flaw in this that I hadn't realized I was doing wrong. So you figure out what to do, you change that. And then over time, your whole system might be completely different, like ours. When we first started the channel, we tried to overshoot what the yeast tolerance was, but we also weren't even using nutrients and things like that at the time. So we were probably getting a lot of stressed yeast, and as a result, we came up with this term called footy flavor, which was stress yeast flavor. I'll be honest, it was from stress yeast. It was actual extra fusels and things like that that we really didn't want in there. But we didn't know because we didn't know. And then as we learned, we started adding more things. So now, not only do we undershoot what the yeast can do, we add nutrients most of the time. We've not found it always necessary, but most of the time we do. And it's kind of like giving the yeast a double chance to do things well. And our brews have substantially improved in just the last few years.
So I hope this video has clarified how a simple specific gravity reading, the same process done in different times of the fermentation process, can give you very different information.
Yep. Something I want to touch on just before we let go is we do have a video on how to read a hydrometer and use it properly. Most hydrometers are triple scale hydrometers, which means they're going to have specific gravity, potential alcohol, and bricks on them. We don't really use bricks at all. Some people like to use it if they're checking like grape sweetness, stuff like that. We don't really use it, so better off to just use specific gravity. Most beer makers and mead makers use specific gravity. Potential alcohol, though, can actually be useful. You don't even need a calculator to figure out your actual rough ABV. If you take your original gravity and you look at it and you turn it to the potential scale, and then you take your final gravity and you turn it to the potential scale, subtract those two numbers, there's your approximate ABV. Which brings me to a whole other point that we're going to talk about someday in more detail, and that's that the best you can hope for as a homebrewer is within 1 or 2 percentage points of accurate, because we're using imperfect tools, we're imperfect beings, we're taking readings that, is it exactly this, is it not? And then there's multiple math, then we're adding dilution, there's this, there's that, there's a lot of approximation. So don't get too caught up in ABV. Instead, if you say, oh, this came out to 11.237%, it's somewhere between 10 and 12, and call it a day. And go just enjoy the brew rather than worrying over that extra 0.237% of alcohol that might not even be there. I'll get off my soapbox now. But that's all we have to say about that for today. If anybody has any questions on this topic or other topics they'd like to see us do a little bit of a deep dive on CSB Unpasteurized, let us know in the comments below. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.
Bye-bye.